What is it, do you think, is going to take for some of the economists out there to be convinced of a meaningful pickup? It does seem from HSBC's report, as we just highlighted, that they've been among the banks that have actually downgraded their full-year forecasts, that they're looking for more sort of structural reforms as China is going through this transition phase, relying on more sort of new growth drivers away from just leaning on the property sector. As I said, heard some commentary coming out from the PBOC this morning, but is it convincing enough? And what will be the main catalyst for, I suppose, people to become more confident about the trajectory of the Chinese economy?
Yeah, well, I won't speak for other institutions or economists, but I think from our point of view, we are looking at an economy that is definitely, feeling the heat of the property downturn. As we mentioned, the global environment not that great either. So we're in a pretty weak situation as concerns the cycle. And then it matters a lot what the policymakers are doing, right? Policymakers are trying to, improve confidence. They're trying to tell the private sector that there is a role for the private sector and that they will be supported. There is not a lot of macroeconomic stimulus. They're not really pumping lots of money into the economy via the fiscal or monetary side, right? So I think we are looking at a constructive policymaker outlook and attitude, but not a lot of macro stimulus. And that's why we are downgrading these forecasts, because confidence is still a little fragile.
And Louis, I've got to ask you, because, some of the things you mentioned, property, you mentioned, the incremental nature in which they're, issuing policy support, perhaps not enough. And, right now, the FT is reporting that, they're funding round by China to support their semi-industry is struggling to raise $41 billion. So there's obviously liquidity pressures there in terms of people looking to invest. So the question I want to ask you is, at what point, or do you think there will come a point where they're going to have to realise that it's one thing to have a long-term plan, but they're going to have to eschew some of their long-term goals for a second and just go big, focus on the short term, lest they get caught up in, the impacts that they can't control elsewhere? Because I would imagine that if you see a recession in the US or a continuation or a deepening of the recession that we are pretty much seeing in the Eurozone now, there's not that much else that you can do in China to try to juice the economy without going big.
Yeah, I think there is probably a little bit of a difference of opinion, or like a difference of, assessment in terms of how bad are things really between observers and Beijing itself. I think Beijing is not as alarmed as many other people are, and that is why we've seen that piecemeal manner in which they are looking at supporting the economy. I think from a Beijing perspective, they can live with our kind of forecast. 4.8% this year, it is around 5%, right? This is pretty close to the target. 4.5% next year. I have the feeling that as long as the labor market is holding up, and as long as we see that recovery in the service sector continuing, I don't have the feeling that they are, as alarmed as some of the observers are.